Hey everyone, Tin Man here, and Dota Underlords has just released a kind of a surprise update on us. Normally these updates come out on Thursday night or even Friday night, but here we've got one on Wednesday afternoon. So let's take a look at what they've changed. The update in which Tusk's foes are brought back down to Earth. So they fixed the bug that was a kind of amusing visual bug with Tusk and his Walrus Punch. Sometimes the unit that was getting knocked up into the air would be knocked so far up in the air they would never actually come back down. They would still be in the fight and still fighting, but they would just be like out of the screen and still kind of fighting from up in the sky, which was kind of funny, but was also a definitely a visual bug that they were able to fix. So that's just a little a bug fix that nothing too important there. They also removed the summon unit challenge, which I know is a point of some concern on sites like Reddit. People would post pictures of like, how am I supposed to complete this summon 200 units challenge with so many summon units removed? You can still complete it, of course, using Primordials, Arc Warden, or Lone Druid, but it was obviously much tougher than intended after they removed so many of the summons last patch. But on to the more meaty changes, the hero changes. Lycan had an issue with his shapeshift bug where he was healing for too much upon shapeshifting, which I didn't actually know was a bug, but he definitely healed a lot whenever he would shapeshift. So not surprised to see that toned down a little bit and come back to the regular levels. Lycan was definitely very strong in the new meta. He got a lot weaker in the early game, where most of his power used to be in the summon wolves, which allowed you to stack the Savage Bleed. But since they removed the summon wolves and they just buffed his shapeshifted form, he's actually become a very, very strong late game carry unit. If you could get him up to 3-star, the bonus healthy gains and the extra crit strike damage is still insanely strong. So Lycan is still a very prominent unit in the meta. He's just shifted a little bit later in the power curve, and you really want to get him up to 3-star to really take advantage of that power in the late game. Slardar, Corrosive Haze will no longer cast on a target currently affected by it, so a minor buff. I guess that was an issue where he would prefer to cast on his current attack target, and if his attack target already had it, he'd try to cast again, which I don't believe it stacks, so that's not very helpful. He would just kind of waste his cast. So this is an overall slight buff to Slardar. I don't think it really changes when or where you want to play Slardar. You still want him as a good, strong early attacker. He has a lot of attack damage, a lot of DPS, and you still want him for scaled in the late game until you can replace him with like Medusa. Venomancer, his Venomous Scale has been adjusted. It's been slightly buffed so that the projectile damage is increased from increased by 5, 10, 20 at 1, 2, and 4 or 3 stars. So not a huge buff. Venomancer is still very weak. He went from being one of the top picks in the old meta with the Savages and Summoning Stones and all that stuff to now being kind of a lower tier pickup. He doesn't do a lot of damage, and even with this buff, I don't think it's a huge buff, and should still probably be a pretty low pick. They did adjust his targeting rules. The actual Gale travels up to 5 cells. I think that's higher than what it was. I'll have to confirm that, but in any case, the effect is still pretty minimal, and you probably don't want to play Venomancer too terribly often. Viper, he has been adjusted. He is no longer an assassin. Viper is now a scaled dragon. He used to be a dragon assassin. They also removed the Viper Strike ability and added Nether Toxin. Nether Toxin will poison a single cell, dealing 50, 100, or 150 damage per second to any enemy unit in it and disabling their passives for 5 seconds. The mana cost is 50 and the cooldown is for 5 seconds. So if you have enough mana, this is going to be basically 100% uptime. This is a rather dramatic change, and this is probably the biggest change of the patch. And this is because assassins basically take a huge nerf. You no longer get Viper, who was a pretty common assassin to include in 3 or 6 assassin compositions, especially if you wanted to go like 3 assassins with Primordial Mages kind of combo with Queen of Pain, Morphling, and Viper, because he dealt a whole lot of magic damage, and he would also give you the assassin bonus along with Queen of Pain and Morphling, or Sand King. So that's obviously not an option anymore, and you instead are going to use him as this more defensive-oriented unit, as a scaled. And scaled are never like really their own build-around kind of alliance, like assassin or warriors or mages would be. They're kind of a secondary alliance that you kind of tack on at the end whenever you notice your opponents have a lot of magic damage. You want to get that scaled bonus. And I think Viper now opens up a couple of new interesting possibilities. I think he's most commonly going to go into warrior builds of all things now, because warriors already had two of the two early game scaled. You had Slardar and Tidehunter. That's before you could get Medusa. And they generally wanted to get the scaled bonus because most mages, or the mage compositions, deal magic damage, and warriors just have bonus armor from their class ability. The warrior alliance just gives armor, which still leaves you vulnerable to magic damage because armor only prevents the physical damage. So adding in scaled was like a pretty common thing in the warrior builds. And you would typically do it with Slardar into Tidehunter, but you tried to cut Slardar in the late game unless you got him to 3-star, and you tried to add in Slark if you had it, but he was kind of mediocre. And then you tried to switch into Medusa, but she was of course hard to find and only came in later in the game. So now you have this option of Viper, which then, because now you're putting the scaled in and now you have Dragon, opens up the possibility of Dragon Knight as kind of a damage dealer along with these warrior compositions. Previously, Dragon Knight has been a great unit, but he was very hard to fit into warrior builds because, well, the dragon and the knight and the human don't really like where's the synergy there? How does he fit in? Yeah, he's a good individual unit, but how would you fit the other dragons in? You couldn't really fit an assassin in the old Viper. Fitting in Puck in the mages, that doesn't really go well with a 3 or 6 warrior frontline. So it was kind of hard to ever see how you could combine warriors and Dragon Knight, even though warriors did have an issue of kind of lacking damage output until you got something like Troll Warlord or a Doom 2-star. They would just would lack some damage, and Dragon Knight would solve that if the alliances fit together. And now with Viper becoming a scaled dragon, if you want to get scaled, you would previously throw in a Slark sometimes, or a Tidehunter, or something along those lines. And now you can throw in Viper. And then you can throw in the Dragon Knight. So I would definitely be curious to see how 3 warriors plus 2 dragons plus maybe 2 or even 4 scaled lineups could work out nowadays. In terms of his Nether Toxin ability, this is the second ability in the game that disables passives, along with Doom and his ability. It's a pretty strong effect, but being only limited to 1 cell is a little bit awkward because if Viper, you really want that strong front line in place to hold the enemies in their cell. If you have kind of a mage composition or another composition where your units die very quickly, like in assassins or in mages, then Viper is going to target 1 cell and then he's going to die, or somebody else is going to die, and then that unit is going to walk forward or move away to target somebody new. And they're going to move out of the Nether Toxin. That's another part why I think it works well in Warriors, because they're going to be a little bit more resilient. They're going to be in there for the long fight, which means he's going to target a cell, and somebody is still probably going to be in that cell for another couple of seconds. They're not going to kill something very quickly and just move on to the next one that often. So I'm very excited to see what happens with Viper. This, like I've said it before, anytime you change alliances on units, even just on a single unit, it has ripple effects throughout the entire meta, and is going to shift a lot of things around. So definitely curious to see how this all plays out. A couple other changes. Big Time Contract, probably the best item in the game right now. Players can only have a maximum of 1 of this item now. So no more Big Time Contract stacking. No more intentionally losing rounds to try to stack multiples of them. And overall, this is a great change because there was nothing that felt more oppressive in the game when someone got 2 or 3 Big Time Contracts. It's such a powerful alliance to be able to attach to whatever you want, and being able to attach it to whatever you want multiple times, and then therefore you don't even need to play Warlock or Ogre Magi. It was just out of control, and I'm very glad that they eventually got to this. I recommended this change along with the Summoning Stone change to do the same thing a long time ago, and I'm glad they're finally getting around to it. The last change here is a change to the Savage Alliance, which we know that they've substantially nerfed Savage Alliance recently because of the removal of Venomancer's Plague Wards and Lycan's Wolves. They now says the Savage Alliance allied Savage units gain plus 4, 8, or 15 attack damage each time they land an attack on an enemy, and this will replace the bleed effect that used to be applied every time they landed an attack. Some quick math on this, it seems like a nerf to me, and a rather substantial one actually, which I don't really understand because Savages were not very strong. So if you do some quick math here, basically every time you attack, you're going to gain 4 attack. Let's say you just have 2 savages. You're going to gain 4 attack damage, but every opponent probably has some armor, so really you're only going to deal about 3 more damage per attack, assuming they just have the standard 5 armor that most units have. So let's say you're doing about 3 more damage per attack every time you attack. But previously, if you just landed 1 attack, that 1 attack from a savage would deal an extra 15 damage, because you deal 5 damage over every second for 3 seconds. And that would be pure damage. That would not be reduced by anything. It would just be 5 damage guaranteed, whereas this is kind of like plus 3-ish damage on every subsequent attack. So your break-even point is kind of at about 3 or 4 about 5 attacks. But if you're attacking the same target 5 times with the old Savage Bleed, you actually deal way more than 15 damage per second, because the bleed constantly stacks up. You're dealing 5 damage per second, then 10 damage per second, then 15 damage per second. And so if you attack for many seconds in a row, you're actually dealing more than 15 damage per second per attack. So you might think that, oh, if your attack damage is going to scale up over the fight, these are going to be really, really good in long, drawn-out fights. And that may be the case if you have a really long, drawn-out fight where you're changing targets a lot. But it's going to be a whole lot worse against anybody who has magic damage or physical damage reduction, such as bonus armor from warriors, or the knight's shield, or anything where you want to burn down a single really tanky target over time. If you get multiple units on the same, multiple savages on the same target, that target used to bleed down very quickly, because you'd stack the bleed up to hundreds of damage per second relatively quickly. Now that's going to take a long time to get the damage done. And so a gut instinct says this is a nerf. I'll have to see exactly how it plays out, but I don't think this is a really good change, because I think savages were already kind of weak, and this rework seems to make it worse. But still excited to play in the new patch with the Big Time Contract change and Viper change, some great additions, as well as some other minor bug fixes. So thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this, and I will see you next time.